Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this first tutorial in a series where I'm going to take us from knowing nothing in Blender to animating both 2D and 3D. Understanding this robust, honestly scary software Blender has been something that I've been toying around with for years, but I finally got into it, hired a tutor, and I'm working hard to learn Blender, and I wanted to share that journey with you. A huge shout out and thank you to my friend over at Point Cloud, a YouTuber who has been my Blender maestro, tutor, mentor on all things Blender. I did pay him for this help, but he's been one of the best teachers I could have found to help me get through navigating this massive software. So go visit him. His link is in the description. Big shout out to Point Cloud. As you're watching this, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments below. I also have a private Facebook group and a Telegram group, as well as a Discord group. So you can find those links also in the description below to come join us and talk about all things Blender animation, 2D animation in Blender, grease pencil, etc., etc. Without further ado, one of the first things that I've wanted to accomplish in Blender is that of camera movement. I will have purchased a scene or a rigged character off of Sketchfab or CG Trader or the Blender Marketplace, and I'll pay somebody on Fiverr to do something for a project for one of my jobs, and I always ask for the source files in Blender, but I'm not sure how to use them and how to move around and navigate. And so yeah, camera movement has been my first and foremost desire to just figure that out, because if you can get your camera movement right, whether that's moving around a 2D object or moving around in 3D space, you can then take your 2D animations, if you're a 2D animator, and you can bring them into Blender and do fun things like I did with my first demos. Nothing special, but my first 2 Blender videos, my thank you 15K subscriber videos. If you haven't done so already, make sure you've downloaded Blender. I'm using the latest Blender 4.2.1 LTS, long-term support. And this is the default scene you'll see. You'll probably get the pop-up that gives you other options. I just click out of it and onto here. This is the first thing you will see. Now, if you're brand new to Blender, we'll go step by step. And if this is annoying to you, just go ahead and skim through this. There should be timestamps at some point on this video, but we're going to do this as if you're brand new, because that's kind of how I came at it. I dabbled in it, but I needed the help to get where I wanted to be. Again, big shout out to Point Cloud, Tommy over at Point Cloud. Go give him a like and a subscribe. He's got some amazing things that he does over there, and he's still open for hire. If you need a personal tutor to go at any of this, you can hire him as well. All right, so we've got our default Blender. If I were to go to File, New, this is what's going to show up. Okay, General. This is what we see. You'll usually see a welcome screen. First thing we want to do is go to Edit Preferences. I like to make my resolution scale a little bigger, especially during these videos, so you can see what I'm doing. You can mess around with that in the interface. Other than that, under add-ons, you will be using some of these add-ons depending on what we're doing. But add-ons are a powerful way to enhance Blender and make things work better for you, as well as files and paths, which we'll get to. I've imported the Neon asset library, which I'll show you in a different lesson. I've also brought in some what's called the Celeste tool. Both of these I purchased off of the Blender Marketplace, but we'll get to that in a minute. But if you want to mess around with your display port, it's right here. And then I like to come in here, save preferences, and exit. All right, first things first, to navigate, you're going to need a 3-button mouse for this. It's just kind of mandatory, as well as a number pad to really get good at Blender. So make sure you have those 2 things, a nice keyboard with a number pad and a middle mouse button. I'm going to middle mouse click and just swing around, and this is your 3D space. And you'll get used to this, I promise. Now, if I let go of my middle mouse button and I hit Shift, middle mouse button, then I'm panning left and right in place. If I let go of Shift and do middle mouse button again, then I can move around. And sometimes you're going to be like, how do I get back here? And it's now I'm panning around here. There are ways to do that. First way, let's go ahead and hit 0. And what 0 is going to do is going to bring us to our camera view right here. And this is what is actually going to be output when you render your scene. Whether you render an image or an animation, this is what the camera is going to see, and that's what we're learning to move around. So you can take the camera and move it around left and right and give it some different make it feel like it's coming alive, more or less. So just practice that middle mouse button and the middle mouse button and shift. The next thing that's going to be important no matter what you're working on is deleting things. Here we're in the default object mode right here. We're not in edit mode or anything else. We're in object mode, which basically lets you move objects around. And objects can be a camera. It can be a light. Over here you can see you also have these objects you can click on, or you can click on them. And I'm zooming in and out using my middle mouse button, scrolly wheel. So I can zoom in and out. Now, if you don't have those fancy things on your mouse, that's what these tools here are for. You can zoom in and out. So if I click and drag up and down with a left click, or I click and drag, or I click and drag, or excuse me, I click. You can use them here, but it's going to be a lot faster if you learn to zoom in and out with the scrolly wheel and then shift and click, shift and middle click, and then just middle click. It's going to be a lot faster to move around. Next, just for navigation purposes, it's nice to be able to move around quickly to certain viewpoints. So if I use my number pad, this is where the number pad comes in handy. I'm going to hit the number 1. And what that does is it gives us a front orthographic view. Number 3 gives us a right orthographic view. And number 7 is a top orthographic view. And I'm hitting shift and middle mouse button. Then I'm going to zoom in, shift middle mouse button, zoom in. And you can move around. And the reason this is so powerful and important to understand, 7, 3, 1 on my numpad, 1, 3, 7, and then 0 as the camera view, is because you're going to be drawing and editing. You're going to want to be able to do it on a certain surface. Let me just give you a quick example. So if I go back to 0 and I go into, you don't have to do this, but you can follow along, Shift A, grease pencil, stroke. Okay, I have a stroke there. I'm going to go to edit mode. Just bear with me. I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to hit A for all, X for delete, and points. Then go back to draw mode, and I'm going to take my pen. I'm going to use my marker, and that's probably good. Now, if I just draw like this, you'll notice it's kind of weird. Now, if I just take my middle mouse button and do this, you can see I drew on that plane of the camera view. So it looks flat here, but as I move in 3D space, it doesn't look like I expect it to. And you can actually marry this to the camera so it always faces the camera. We'll cover that a little bit later in the modifiers. But this is powerful. You can start to imagine, you could just draw a tree like this, but we've got to figure out how to make it work. Otherwise it's all over the place and squonky. That's where these number pad things come in so handy. 1, 3, 7. So now let's just go over here. I hit middle mouse button. Now I'm no longer flat. I'm going to hit 7 again, shift middle mouse button. And if I just wanted to draw something like this, and then I wanted to go 3, go like this, and then I wanted to go 1, let me just see where I'm at. So I'm going to hit 1. You're going to see that this thing I drew, more or less, we'll talk about where you can place things, different drawing points. Right now I'm drawing on the origin. You can draw on surfaces in different areas. You can draw on the front, the side, the top, at the cursor. There's different ways to draw, but just don't get lost in this. This is just to show you an example why these number pad presets are so important. Top, right, front. All right, so what I'm going to do to keep it clean is going to go File, New, General, don't save. Back to our default. So let's delete this cube. I'm going to click on this cube, X, delete that object. And we don't need this light, so I'm going to click on it over here, X, delete. It's important to get used to hovering in the place where you want the command to happen. So if I hovered over here and hit X, it might not work. I need to be in that scene, that space. So the first thing we need to be able to do to use our camera is to be able to move it around. So I'm going to use that neat trick that we had. I'm going to do number pad 7. And now I'm in the top view. If you don't see your camera, just zoom out a little bit. You can click on it here. Now watch what happens. I'm going to hit G, and I use the terminology grab. I'm going to grab it. So I've highlighted the camera. I'm going to move it now. So I need to grab it, G, and watch what you can do. I can move it all around, okay? And so if I hit escape, it'll go back. But if I hit G and I left click, it's going to stay right where I put it. G, left click, G, left click. Now I'm going to constrain my camera to one of the axes, X, Y, or Z. And so I'm going to hit G, and this time I'm going to hit X as I'm moving it. Oh, now I'm constrained to the X axis. Y, I'm constrained to the Y axis. Z, I'm constrained to the Z axis. Now I don't see anything because Z is up and down. So if I go to 3, let me hit escape, and I go to the 3 number pad, and I do G, Z, now you can see I'm going up and down. If I do Y, you can see that. If I do X, you can't see it because I'm facing that that direction. But just that so you can see the Z, which is up and down in this 3D space. Now, one thing I love to have open is a second screen, and this is one of the powerful things of Blender. I'm going to go over here into this space between any screens. Right here you can see it turns into a crosshair. If I click and drag, I can create another screen. Okay, and this is powerful. At first it was uber confusing to me, but it's a super powerful way to work here and have your camera view here. So, and notice I'm hovering over each one of these. If I hit over here and I hit 7, it's going to affect that. If I hover over this and I hit 0, it's going to affect that. So this is how I like to do it, because now if I move my camera around over here on this side, G, you'll see I get a camera view. So I can see exactly what the camera is seeing. Okay, so I'm going to click here. Now, if I hit the letter R, having my camera selected, I can rotate it. I can rotate it on the X-axis, the Y-axis, and the Z-axis. Okay, so we have R for rotation. I'm going to hit escape. G for move, X, Y, and Z to constrain. And then R to rotate, X, Y, and Z to do that. Or I can do it freely, R, and I can just rotate. But that's not very useful unless you know how to navigate this really well. Escape. Now, the way I like to learn is actual real-world practical use case learning, we'll call it. That was a mouthful. Essentially what that means is I like to be able to learn as I go through a project, something that I could use today in the real world. And so let's learn keyframing with the camera. This is going to be powerful. Already you should kind of get excited like I was to see that you can move this camera around, and already you know that, oh wow, I could bring something in here and create a little film. So if I did Shift A, mesh, and we'll learn the Shift A, cube, and then I zoom my camera out. How do I zoom my camera out? That's not zooming my camera. My camera is this box. I'd have to grab my camera, G, I'm going to just scoot it back, and that's what it sees, but now I'm down too far. So I'm going to go to my other view, GZ, to go up. Okay, click, left click, GX, no, GY. Okay, I'm going to go back to the top view, GX. And then I'm going to rotate it. So R, I want to rotate it on the Z axis or the Y axis or the Z or the X axis. So there's different things. And you'll notice over here as I do this, I'm going to hit escape. These things are moving right here. This is going to be one of your best friends. This is our first tab we're going to learn. This is the object properties tab. It's this orange object box. So just think of the default box, and this is your friend. What this does in object view is it moves, it transforms it. Edit view is a little bit different. We'll learn about that later, where you actually edit the actual rotation of the actual vertices, where this is you're only editing its container, so to speak. It's transform, it's object. So just keep that in mind over here. So if I wanted to rotate it this way, I could click and drag left and right. Okay, so let's just get that in view. I'm not too terribly concerned. I'm going to hit 0, enter on that, on being exact, as long as it's there in view. So now my camera's been moved, and one of the coolest things in Blender is its animation keyframing. It's very powerful. There's 2 quick ways to do this. There's this button right here. If you hover over it, auto keying. If I turn that on, I'm on frame 1. If you don't see your timeline here, you just need to add a new window by clicking and dragging. Oops, that's the wrong way. Now that I have that, something that drives me crazy is, what do I do with all these windows? This is too much. And the way to get rid of that is as follows. You click here, you hold, and you drag over. Okay, oh, it just wants to do one at a time. Click here, hold, drag over. And now I've eliminated those. So I just want to create one down here. So I'm going to come over here. So if I wanted to add another window, let's pretend that this one's gone. So I'm going to get rid of it by clicking, holding, and dragging down. Same here, clicking, holding, dragging down. This is one of the biggest frustrations. See right there, I have 2 new windows, so I've already messed it up. It's something I'm getting used to, but I think I've got it, but I'm going to probably have to figure it out as I go along. Now I accidentally got rid of my window, so all I have to do is click here and go to 3D viewport, hit 0, and I'm back to camera view. But I want to add one right down here. So I'm going to go where my crosshair shows, click, drag up like this. See, now there's my thing. I'm going to have to get better at this and figure out, go look up a tutorial on how to better navigate with these windows, because they're powerful, but it can kind of get frustrating. Now I want to move this so it goes across all of it. So click, drag down, over. And now I have this here, and all I've got to do is change it to the timeline under animation column, timeline. Now I have my timeline. So now that I've got my timeline, if I turn this on and I hit G and I just move the camera to there, it's all automatically created keyframes on the camera. Now there's different parts, different properties to cameras and different things to objects. So I'm just going to leave it like this so it simplifies it. And now if I come to frame, let's say 120, half of 240, or around there, and I hit G, and let's just go like this, and then R. Instead of R, I'm going to move R down like this. Look how, because I have this checked, auto keying is on. Now if I hit back and I hit play, watch on this side what the camera's doing. And I love this in Blender. It's got it easing already. So if I hit stop or pause and I control or I select these, see how they're yellow, like a golden yellow, I hit command or control C and I go to the very end and I do control V. Now watch what happens. Play. And it has this easing, and we'll talk about easing in another lesson. I don't want to overwhelm us here, but look how smooth that was. All right, so that's auto keying, and what Thomas taught me, which I think is something that is much better and more control, is to not use this. It can get really frustrating as you're going through things and the auto keying's on. So I tend to not use this in my experience so far. I'd rather just do it manually, and I'll show you because it's actually really fun that way. So I'm in the timeline. To get rid of all those keyframes, I just hit A for all. Now they're all golden yellow. I can hit X for delete keyframes, or I could have clicked and dragged them all. So now the camera doesn't have any keyframes. I could have added keyframes to this square, this cube, and it would have done its own thing. So we're actually going to do that. So here I am on the square. I don't have auto keyframe on, which is very powerful and important to remember. I want my first start of this cube to be as it is. So I'm going to come over here in the object properties, and whatever I want to add a keyframe, I'm just going to put I, and see how they turn yellow, and it added them here. Same with the rotation, I, and the scale, I. So I'm going to go to 125 now, and just for fun, we're going to do it in here or here. I'm going to go rotate, and I've selected it, so it's rotating. Let's rotate it that much, left click, and then I'm going to want to rotate on a different axis. That was the Z axis. See how it's orange? That means it's been changed, but it doesn't mean that it's been saved in a keyframe. These ones have been keyframed earlier. They're green. This orange one means you've changed it, but it's not keyframed. So if I just wanted to keyframe that, I hit I, and now it's memorized that keyframe. So if I just hit back and play, it'll, oops, I'm playing backwards. There we go. It'll do exactly what I told it to do. Okay. Now, if I wanted to add, let's go back to that. This button is going to take us back to the next keyframe. If I wanted to add a different rotation, like on the Y-axis and the X-axis. Now let's hit, see how they're orange, to make sure I keyframe it. I'm sure I want that I, and now they're yellow. And then what I'll do is I'll copy all these, click and drag. See, these are grayed out. Control C. I'm going to go to the very end because I want it to loop perfectly. Control V. Now if I hit play, nice ease, and then it eases back. And I have not seen such a beautiful ease in other software like I have in Blender. It makes me want to cry. It's so beautiful. So let's talk about that just briefly. Already you should kind of have in your mind like, oh wow, so I can change this to the 3D viewport. I could change it to the timeline. I can change it. So we already know something cool that we can do with this. We can change this window to be something else. And so if you came in here and you went to the graph editor, you're going to see these graphs. And what do these graphs do? They are our ease in and ease out graphs. And so we could, and what I love about Blender, love, is we could hit play and do this live. And so, but now I don't have my window. So how do I get that window where I can see what the camera sees? I'm going to go ahead and click here. Oh, that's not what I want. Escape. Click here. Escape. I think it's up. There we go. 0. Write in the comments if you know a better way to do that. I need to go look up a tutorial. It's driving me nuts. That's one thing I haven't mastered yet, is that dumb new window thing, but you can save your workspace. So there we go. So we could play the easing here, and you can mess around with how fast it eases in and out. Let's just do this for fun. Watch what happens. So there's the delay there, right? And so this is one of the most beautiful things in any animation software I've worked with, where you can just come in and live work on the easing. Such a beautiful way to get that smooth transition of things. Okay, so I want to get back to how I was. So I'm going to get rid of this guy. I'm going to click down, and I'm going to get that crosshair. Actually, I'm just going to change this to my 3D viewport 0. All right, so we've keyframed those. Great. So how would we keyframe the camera? If you want to pause and try that on your own, go for it. But let's do that next. I'm going to hit pause. Back. I'm going to make sure I'm clicking on the camera. See how it's highlighted in the object mode. Over here, it's highlighted orange. And we'll talk about parenting a little bit later, where I shift selected this one and it's orange, and this is a deep orange, and that we can parent these Control P, but we're not going to do that this time. So we're just going to select the camera, and there's no keyframes here. That's just fine. So if I want the camera to start here, I'm going to do I. And then let's say by the time we hit halfway, I want the camera, so I'm going to hit over here on the top view 7, G. I'm going to move it forward, okay? And I'm going to use my X rotation to look down at it, okay? And now these are orange, meaning I've made a change, Jared, but I haven't keyframed it. So I'm going to hit I, just hovering over it. You need to be hovering over it, I. And now I have a keyframe, so I'm going to copy these, copy, go to the end, paste. And just like that, I hope this inspires you to see how powerful this can be for animation. Now we have this set up to where we can take our camera, our objects, our imported 2D objects, which we'll talk about in a following lesson, and already we've got a video. All I'd have to do, just real quick, is come to our render. I'm on the EV engine. We can use cycles. We can talk about that a little bit later. Let's talk about one thing. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to switch this to my camera mode 0. And this to my top view. I'm just going to go opposite because I can see this button right here. This is the viewport shading. I'm going to tab that, and this is what it's actually going to look like if I hit render image. That's what it's going to render like. And we're like, well, why doesn't anything show up? We'll talk about lighting in a minute. It's very powerful, and it's a whole nother lesson in and of itself. But just like that, we can render the entire animation. So over here, I'm using the cycles or Eevee. We'll talk about those in another lesson. And over here, I can set my resolution. So if you wanted a vertical for a YouTube short or a TikTok, you could change this 1080 to 1920. And there's your viewport. And then you can change your frame rate as well. And then the most important part is where you're going to save it. Now this is a little bit different than you're used to. You don't do file save as, it's just always set here. So you want to make sure you set that. And then you want to do your file format. You can do a PNG, a JPEG, image sequence, or a full video together. And I'll show you why we want to do an image sequence versus a JPEG or whatever it is when we actually export this. But I think that's enough for now to get you started. In the next lesson, we'll go over the camera and putting on a track. And we'll lock objects to the camera and the camera to objects. And we'll show you how to also import your own 2D sequences, be it from Cartoon Animator, which I'm most familiar with, or Moho, or other animation software. Stick around, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.